How did Victor Bout begin? How the infamous arms dealer who supplied both rebels and the very governments fighting them? In which movie did Nicolas Cage portray his character? How did Brittney Griner, the world champion basketball player, contribute to reducing his prison sentence by 15 years? How did undercover agents lure him into a trap? And what role does he play in Russia today? All that and more in today's video. Victor Bout was born in 1967 in the USSR, in the city of Dushanbe, which is now the capital of Tajikistan. In his youth, he joined the military and was assigned to the Air Transport Regiment near Vitebsk. The next step in his military career was the Soviet intelligence training ground, the Military Institute of Foreign Languages in Moscow. Although he never admitted it, according to his partners and former comrades, he became a spy for the main Directorate of Intelligence. At the Institute, Bout learned Portuguese, which enabled him to serve as a translator and advisor to military pilots during interactions with air traffic control and local commanders in Angola and Mozambique. Over time, Bout became a true polyglot in addition to his native language. He mastered at least 5 others. Bout was adept at making connections, a skill that allowed him to make his mark in the aviation industry in the United Arab. While frequenting the hangars at Sharjah's International Airport, he forged many lucrative relationships and subsequently founded the company Aircess, which specialized in air transport. Enterprise started with a few demobilized Russian aircraft, and by the mid-1990s, it already boasted an extensive fleet. Bout's planes delivered everything the local oligarchs in Russia needed, while simultaneously transporting air conditioners, televisions, furniture, and cash to war-torn regions in Africa. Soon, his aircraft laden with electronics and textiles began flying to Afghanistan as well. In Afghanistan, Liftor met Ahmad Shah Massoud, the defense minister fighting against the Taliban. Ahmad requested Bout's assistance in procuring arms, and although Bout had never before been involved in this business, he agreed to help. He contacted the experienced Bulgarian arms dealer Peter Merchev and passed him a list of the Afghans' requirements. The two then met in person in Sofia, where they agreed that Peter would handle the procurement, while Victor would take charge of transportation. Later, in an interview with a New York Times journalist, Merchev stated that Bout knew nothing about arms. He even confused different types and calibers. Nevertheless, this did not stop him from becoming the world's largest arms dealer within the next 5 years. Bout's planes began transporting arms to Angola, where Victor had once worked as a translator. The country had been embroiled in internal conflicts since 1975, when the fighting intensified in 1998. The demand for military equipment surged, and Victor Bout supplied it in vast quantities. Notably, the arms dealer operated on 2 fronts, supplying both the ruling government and the rebel movement UNITA. Bout later admitted that he also supplied equipment to Togo and Zaire. However, his activities did not escape the notice of agencies such as the CIA and NSA. Agents monitored Bout's operations and compiled reports on his aircraft's flights to Angola. Over time, investigators began to uncover the scale of the arms dealer's operations. According to the information gathered, Bout dealt arms with rebels from the Congo, led a criminal group that smuggled minerals, cassiterite, and coltan from that country, collaborated with Liberia's convicted war criminal and dictator Charles Taylor, simultaneously sold arms to both the Taliban and the Afghan forces fighting them, supplied military equipment and leased aircraft to Gaddafi's government in Libya. According to one of his pilots, he also supplied weapons that were shipped to Africa and used in internal conflicts that claimed millions of lives. Bout had no qualms about supplying equipment to bloody internal conflicts while, at the same time, transporting on a paid basis to those same regions United Nations peacekeeping forces, soldiers of the French Foreign Legion, humanitarian aid shipments for populations in Africa, assistance for tsunami victims in the Indian Ocean. When a report detailing these activities reached the desk of Dr. Schneider, who in Bill Clinton's administration handled African affairs, he described Bout as the embodiment of evil, noting that this man possessed no moral backbone whatsoever. Interestingly, a few years later, reports emerged that even the Americans, along with the British, had utilized Bout's services during the invasion of Iraq. Despite his large-scale operations, Victor remained in the shadows for a long time. In 1999, he came under the radar of authorities, who began linking him to the issue of so-called blood diamonds and the country of Sierra Leone in West Africa. In December 2000, the United Nations published a report that, for the first time, drew attention to conflicts over diamond mining territories, the sale of which enabled dictators and rebels to purchase arms. According to the report, a factory was to be established in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, that would cut diamonds in such a way that it would be impossible to determine whether they originated from legitimate mines or belonged to the blood diamonds category. As it turned out, Bout had his own base in Kigali, and those responsible for setting up this factory were connected to him. From the moment the report was issued, government agencies began scrutinizing Victor's operations more closely and no longer turned a blind eye to his activities. In 2002, Interpol issued a warrant for his arrest. Authorities were then searching for him on charges of money laundering in Belgium. The United States also took a keen interest in the Russian arms dealer. In 2003, during an interview with the New York Times, Bout himself declared that he was currently the second most wanted person by the Americans, after Osama bin Laden. The arms dealer did not intend to surrender easily. He skillfully changed the names of his companies and shuffled money among foreign bank accounts. He managed everything from Russia, where he was completely safe, and avoided traveling to countries where he might be detained. In 2005, the Office of Foreign Assets, controlled in the U.S. Department of the Treasury, froze all of Bout's assets in the States and imposed an embargo on all of his enterprises. Interestingly, according to American journalists, it was only after Bout's companies were added to the sanctions list that the Department of Defense discovered he was shipping tents and frozen food to American soldiers in Baghdad. Following the ensuing scandal, the Pentagon terminated all contracts with him. At the same time, the FBI conducted a search at the home of one of his close associates residing in Texas. During the operation, copies of Bout's passport, flight logs, bank statements, and diamonds worth $200,000 were seized. During that period, Victor Bout's persona and activities became so notorious that a movie starring Nicolas Cage was made about his life. The production, titled Lord of War, which tells the story of the Eastern European arms dealer, hit theaters in September 2005 and became a major hit. In the real world, authorities were still on the hunt for Victor. Conflicting information about his activities was coming in from Moscow. Bout's wife, Alla, even stated that after returning to Russia, they were facing financial difficulties. The United Nations, which was sporadically monitoring the cargo on his planes, also found nothing that would have violated the imposed sanctions. The Americans needed to be sure whether Bout had withdrawn from the arms trade or had merely become more cautious. Juan Zarat from the Department of Counterterrorism, having gained access to President Bush's inner circle of advisors, proposed luring Bout into an ambush. Together with Michael Brown, the head of the DEA's anti-drug operations, they decided to set up undercover agents to catch him in the act. In 2007, using a secret informant from the arms dealing circle, Mike Snow contacted Bout's partner, Andrew Smulian, in order to lure him into an ambush. They fabricated a story claiming that members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, considered a terrorist organization by the U.S., intended to place a multi-million-dollar arms order. In January 2008, undercover agents operating under the aliases Carlos and Ricardo met with Mike Snow and Bout's associate, Andrew Smulian. During the meeting, they claimed that they had cash from drug trafficking to make the purchase, and that they needed the arms for attacks on American soldiers stationed in Colombia. The undercover agents outlined their requirements: Soviet anti-aircraft missile systems, night vision devices, and drones. Smulian took the bait, even though he was unable to personally execute the order. After the meeting with Carlos and Ricardo, he went to Moscow, where he conveyed the details of the deal to Bout. The arms dealers estimated that the shipment could weigh as much as 100 tons and be valued between $15 and $20 million. Once everything was settled, plans for the final meeting were set in motion, with Victor Bout expected to appear in person. To finalize the deal, various locations were proposed, including Romania, Montenegro, or Armenia. Ultimately, Thailand was chosen, a destination that didn't require a visa for him. On March 5, 2008, the so-called man of life and death flew to Bangkok. Meanwhile, agents working in close cooperation with the Thai police established their base at the Sofitel Hotel, from where they meticulously prepared their next moves and surveillance plan. Finally, the long-awaited meeting between the arms dealers and undercover agents posing as clients took place. Snow, along with Smulian and Bout, first met them at a bar, before moving to a conference room where they gathered around a table. At that point, Ricardo began outlining their weapon requirements, while Victor Bout meticulously noted them down. 100 anti-aircraft launchers, 5,000 AK-47s, 10 million rounds of ammunition, 20,000 grenades, 740 mortars, and a ton of explosives. After finalizing the list, they moved on to discussing delivery logistics, including who would sign the NDU certificates and where the shipment was to be airdropped. During the conversations, Booth stated that he knew the arsenal would be used to eliminate Americans. As the talks concluded, and Carlos and Ricardo were shaking Victor's hand, DEA agents and the Thai police burst in. DEA Regional Director Tom Pasquarello later admitted that he was completely surprised by Bout's reaction to the arrest. "I've seen people in such situations many times. Sometimes they're angry, sometimes they're combative, sometimes they're emotional. Victor was relaxed. That memory still plays in my head. Everything that had just happened set his life on fire, and he didn't even break a sweat. It looked as if he had simply sat down to read a newspaper." After the ambush, Smulian, who had been lured into the trap and unknowingly maneuvered into Bout's case, decided to cooperate with the authorities. Victor, on the other hand, was taken into custody in Thailand. An extradition process to the U.S. began, which the Russians tried to block at all costs. 2 years of legal battles. DEA agents finally arrived for Victor in November 2010 and took him to the United States. His trial in a New York court began less than a year later. The indictment included charges of supporting a terrorist organization, intent to take the lives of American citizens, and attempting to acquire and use anti-aircraft weapons. The trial received intense media attention, and Bout, both in interviews with journalists and in the courtroom, firmly denied that he had ever tried to sell weapons to the Colombians. He insisted that it was merely a casual, innocent conversation. His words did little to help him. In 2012, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison and fined $15 million. The Lord of War never admitted guilt and consistently maintained that he had been wrongfully convicted. According to his sentence, Victor Bout was supposed to remain behind bars until 2037. Fate took an unexpected turn, and his prison term was indirectly shortened unintentionally by American basketball player Brittney Griner. In February 2022, the world champion and WNBA player was detained at a Moscow airport. It was later revealed that she had a vape cartridge in her luggage containing less than 1 gram of cannabis oil, which is prohibited in Russia. The basketball player was immediately arrested and sentenced to 9 years in prison, after which she was sent to a penal colony. The U.S. authorities did not leave her without support. They proposed a prisoner exchange with the Russians and began lengthy negotiations. The U.S. government's offer was as follows. You hand over Griner and the soldier Paul Whelan, who was convicted of espionage, and we will return Victor Bout to you. The latter was highly valuable to Russia because despite years of efforts by U.S. intelligence, he never revealed any Kremlin secrets. After prolonged negotiations, an agreement was finally reached. In December 2022, Griner was exchanged for Bout. Russia refused to release Whelan. After returning to his homeland, Bout became a prominent figure in propaganda media, openly supporting Russia's recent invasion of Ukraine. His loyalty to Russia was so pronounced that he once declared he would volunteer for the front. He did not follow through on this promise. Instead, he joined the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, officially stepping into the political arena. In the summer of 2024, he ran in the elections and secured a seat representing the Ulyanovsky district. On October 7, 2024, the Wall Street Journal reported that Bout had returned to his old profession, citing sources within security structures. The American newspaper revealed that in August, representatives of a militant group from Yemen had arrived in Moscow. According to the independent Russian outlet, The Insider. The visit was allegedly related to the purchase of AK-47 rifles for a sum of $10 million. It is unclear whether the negotiations were conducted on the Kremlin's orders or with its silent approval. It is known that the rifles were supposed to be sent to Yemen under the guise of a food shipment. Previously, several ships carrying Russian grain had already arrived there. Initially, the Kremlin refused to comment on the reports, but after the article was published, it issued a statement claiming that the entire story was fake news, deliberately released on the Russian president's birthday.